Hey retro gamers, the year is 1993 and we've learned that there ain't nothing wrong with a little buff and grind in the 7th Saga for the Super Nintendo. I'm Eddie Inzauto and this is Smashing Bricks. Hey, welcome to Smashing Bricks, a retro gaming podcast, a show about revisiting classic video games together to see if they hold up to the rose tint of nostalgia. I'm your host, Eddie Inzauto, and today I'm joined by Jake, host of Grinding with the Boys, an RPG video game podcast, of which there are 30 episodes and no more. What's going on, Jake?
Hey, how's it going? Thanks for having me on.
You're welcome. It's going to be an amazing experience because we're playing one of my favorite games from childhood. But do you want to talk about your podcast? Because it still exists. I know that you had your last episode very recently.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about it. Three of my close friends and I, we about 2 years ago ended up wanting to talk more in depth about different RPG video games and basically wanted to challenge each other to play the same game and pick things for each other to play. Like, you know, that dream of picking your favorite game that you know your friend has never played and then talking with them about it. And we're like, let's just make that a podcast. And so over the last 2 years, we, through like a slightly randomized process, played a different RPG over the course of a couple episodes and then would talk about it. And our format kind of shuffled a couple of times as we were realizing what worked and didn't work. And at the end of last year, we just finished our final episode after deciding, you know, we had a good time. Some of us changed jobs, switched where we were living, and just sort of got a little bit busy. And we're like, this is a good way to end it, you know, finish 2025 and say a final hurrah. But those episodes are still live and they're still going to be out there for a while. So if you want to hear about people playing some RPGs, some classic, some newer stuff, some indie stuff, give us a listen. Grinding with the Boys. We're on Spotify and Apple Podcasts and some other places. And that's Boys, BOIS.
Nice. And have you had any particularly special guests on the show ever?
No, I don't think so. Yeah. Yeah, we actually we had you on to get us to play Dark Souls. What was that?
Yeah.
November?
Something like that.
And that was
Jake
awesome.
loved it, by the way. It was his favorite game he learned. You got to go listen.
Yeah, that's definitely what my tier ranking at the end of the year showed.
Oh no, I remember that. I was so sad. Oh god.
But I know the rest of the cast loved it and we're really excited to talk to you about it. And I really like talking to 4 people who really love this very popular franchise and genre that just doesn't work for me. And we got to play together online some, which was actually like really fun and really cool.
That was my favorite part. Not to say the podcast wasn't good, but the fact that I got to play with somebody for probably the first time, like actually being on Discord talking while we were going through like a real co-op experience, aside from just, you know, linking up with a stranger. It was awesome.
Yeah, it was really fun. I'm not good at the game, and I felt a little bit like if we were to compare it to a video game, I felt like Ellie in the beginning of The Last of Us, where I'm just kind of in the background yelling encouragement as you killed enemies. But it was actually fun because I was like, oh, I see how you're approaching like this room or this boss and different things like that.
Yeah, it takes a little bit of learning, I think, which is a lot like the 7th Saga. Takes a lot of grinding. But let's talk about you first, because like with all my other first-time guests, I want to ask you a few questions to help people get to understand your gaming preferences and style.
I'm ready. Let's do it.
Okay. When did you start playing video games?
So I think there's like two answers that stand out in my mind, and it's early enough I couldn't actually tell you which is first. So I'm going to tell you both of them. When I was pretty young, like 6 years old, I distinctly remember playing a lot of the original Nintendo Entertainment System with my brothers in my parents' room, well into like 10 years old. Specifically loved playing this shoot 'em up called Dragon Spirit on there
Mm,
because you got to be a dragon, and that was awesome. And then we also had a family PC in our living room, and my dad was a very big like PC gamer, still is, and we played a lot of different PC games that, like in hindsight, I did not really understand how to do them, but I like doing it anyway. And that was on DOS, and I played a lot
nice.
of like Might and Magic 3 and Might and Magic 4. Those were like the two standouts that I remember playing quite a lot. There's sort of like turn-based, pretty crunchy RPGs that my dad definitely had to like constantly explain what we were doing, but spent a lot of time on the computer as like a family playing those.
That's so cool. Awesome. So you have or had a podcast about RPG video games. Is that your favorite genre or is a different one your favorite genre?
Um, I think RPGs are a close runner-up, but my favorite genre is definitely strategy games. I like that's my comfort genre. If I'm remotely feeling stressed at work and personal life, I just dive into either a turn-based or a real-time strategy game and just watch the engines of my empire, my kingdom, what have you, expand and grow. I love Age of Empires 2. I have probably 800 hours in Steam on the two
Ooh,
newer versions of it, and just love strategy games.
very cool. Um, okay. So I guess building off of your first couple answers, PC versus console.
No question, PC for me.
Okay. Do you have a favorite developer and or publisher?
Hmm. I feel like there are periods of BioWare where I will play whatever came out during like that golden era of BioWare, like original Baldur's Gate through Mass Effect 3. Give me one of those games and I will be happy, even if it's not my favorite of that era of games. I will still like absolutely love it. But if we're talking about people still making games, Larian has been like my go-to studio for probably about like 8 years. Where my friends and I are playing through Divinity Original Sin 2 for the second time. I've played Baldur's Gate twice. I've tried some of Larian's other games. They just make fantastic, really great turn-based RPGs.
Nice. And wait, did you say that Age of Empires 2 is your favorite game of all time, or is it something else?
Um, I think Age of Empires 2 probably it takes that spot for favorite game of all time. It's either that or the Mass Effect trilogy, and I think it really depends what experience I'm looking for in the moment. But those are 1 and 2, and they just sort of jockey for position.
Okay. And now I want to do one of these, but I don't know if you're going to have the relevant experience. I like to do like console versus console.
Sure,
So
yeah. I have played many console games. They
so
just, don't have as lasting impact.
the biggest console war in my life was the Super Nintendo versus Genesis. Do you have an opinion there?
Super Nintendo, easy. It's one that I was younger when that like console war was very preeminent, and my friends and I all like Sega. But in hindsight, as a retro gamer now, give me Super Nintendo over Sega, easy.
Nice. And we're playing a Super Nintendo game. And I'm just going to do one more. Buy, borrow, or bin. I did this last episode also, and I'm going to choose PS2, GameCube, and Xbox, that generation.
I have feelings. Yeah. Been the Xbox. It's
Always.
in the time it was good, but no thanks. I'm going to borrow the PS2 and then buy the GameCube. GameCube's actually the retro console that I have the biggest collection for. I
Nice.
love my GameCube. Think it ages phenomenally well. PS2
Yeah,
has great
man.
RPGs, but GameCube stuff, it slaps. It ages well.
Very cool. So you appreciated my answers on the top Nintendo consoles bonus round.
I did. I did. I will
Nice.
say that you are underrepresenting handhelds, in my opinion. I know that's
Eh.
something in our Discord chats you and I disagree with a little bit. Because if you were like, what console could I, like, if I have one console and that's it, give me a DS Lite because I can play GBA and DS on it.
Okay. And that'll be the final answer to the question I didn't ask, but is important to you and who you are as a gamer. Now, let's get to a game that is important to me and not so much who I am as a gamer, but was important to me in my life. And it's called the 7th Saga. And it is a notably criticized game, but we will get to all of that in just a moment. First, what is it? It's a Japanese RPG released in April 1993 in Japan and September 1993 in North America for the Super Nintendo, developed by Produce with an exclamation point and published by Enix. The Japanese RPG at the time was pretty standard in its mechanics and structure. Turn-based battles, overhead view on an overworld. You end up walking into towns and then you go around and speak to NPCs. You go to dungeons, you fight bosses, you do some quests throughout, etc., etc. Really big sprites, colorful graphics, a lot of Mode 7 for the Super Nintendo, and a narrative style that it's not very text heavy like you would see in a Final Fantasy where they have lots of conversations, but you kind of get what's going on in snippets and little tidbits from talking to NPCs, more like a Dragon Quest game, an early Dragon Quest game. And it was a pretty big world, lots of cities and villages to go to. Each one has its own little thing going on, and you'll get involved in the narrative and activities related to that. And it's definitely a start to finish trek from like one end of the world to the other. Basically, Lord of the Rings.
Mm, mm. Yeah, sure, basically Lord of the Rings, just one of the greatest fantasy stories of all time, right?
Yep, exactly. But not really. That's a joke. I don't want people to think that I'm a psychopath. It's bad enough that this is one of my favorite games of all time. Anyway, so what was your prior relationship with this game, if any? I already know the answer, but tell the listeners.
I had never even heard of this game. When you reached out to be like, "Hey, we've talked about you being on an episode. What do you think of this game?" And I was like, "Never heard of it." And you're like, "It's grinding heavy." I'm like, "That's fine. That won't bother me." Um, and I immediately began like researching a little bit of the game. You were very helpful in giving me a ton of like advice on how to play it, but I knew nothing about it. Like absolutely nothing. I'd never heard of it.
Wow. So a true blind play. On the other hand, I played this a lot. My friends George and Brian, who've both been on the show, had this game. I would borrow it all the time. I have beaten this game numerous times with almost every character, of which there are 7, and you can have different combinations in your party of 2 people. And yeah, I loved it. I used to draw pictures representing this game in my notebooks at school in like first, second grade or something. I would write stories with these characters. I just really was into this game for whatever reason. It just worked for me. Yeah, this was like my main 16-bit RPG, this and Earthbound, which is saying a lot for how much I have missed knowing what the library of the Super Nintendo was like. I only played FF4 like in the 2010s or something.
That's just absolutely, I don't know, it's mind-boggling to me. I have not dug as deep into the SNES like RPG library as I would like, but hearing that those are your two like main touch points for JRPGs, which I knew from listening to the podcast, but it's still always every time is like this really explains a lot about sort of some of your commentary and touch like what you feel about different games that are more modern.
Yeah, yeah, I bet it does. We'll do a little bit of history. We're doing less of this than we used to, but some of the contemporary titles I think are important. You had mentioned that you were curious about that because it helps you kind of understand this game in the context of what else was out. So the Super Nintendo was about 2 to 3 years old. Squaresoft had Secret of Mana and Romancing Saga 2, which is part of the Final Fantasy Legends series. Capcom released the first Breath of Fire. Sega's Phantasy Star 4 and Shining Force 2 were on the Genesis at this time. The first Lufia game, Lufia and the Fortress of Doom, came out the same year. Shadowrun. Enix themselves had Illusion of Gaia by developer Quintet, and Dragon Quest 1 and 2 were remade for the Super Famicom in the Dragon Quest V engine this year. And that is not even including CRPGs and the broader gaming industry. So a lot of RPGs were starting to hit, and this wasn't even quite the golden years yet, which would come maybe a couple years later with some of the really big hitters.
Yeah, I think it's important to note, like,
Mm-hmm.
the biggest names, I think, on the SNES are still a year and two removed, right? Like, Chrono Trigger, I believe, is 2 years in the
Mm-hmm.
future, and then Final Fantasy VI is a full year in the future.
Mm-hmm.
So that's, I think, an important touch point for when discussing this game and even some of those other titles that
Yeah.
were named.
And Earthbound wasn't till 95 either. Produce is actually a decent developer, I guess, even if nobody knows who they are. This was their fourth game. So this game followed Super Adventure Island the year before. Super Bomberman was released 5 days after the Japanese release of this. Brainlord came the next year. And then later, Super Bomberman 2, 4, and Neo Bomberman, plus this game's sequel, Mystic Arc, all came out in 1995. Plus, they did a few PlayStation 1 games and the terrible Nintendo 64 fighting game Dual Heroes. Look into that, never play it. I also saw on Moby Games today that a group of 20 people credited on this game were also credited on EVO Search for Eden, a game that we played
Hmm.
on this podcast and gave a double brick to, even though it was one of my childhood rentals that I really liked. It just didn't hold up for us.
Yeah, Brick
Um,
is the right call with that game. I played during
yeah,
that month.
yeah, that was just a little tough to play, but that's okay. The concept was fantastic. Um, Something to note about this game is that the North American version, the 7th Saga, was changed quite a bit from the original Japanese release, Elnard. Enemies and rival apprentice stats were boosted to increase the difficulty. Player character stat growth per level was reduced, making progression slower and making it more grind heavy. And experience and gold from battles was decreased, also increasing the grind. And this was reportedly made by Enix America to extend gameplay length, but they kind of ruined the game. They made it just notoriously difficult. It's known for being like too hard and too grindy. So Elnard, the Japanese version, is considered the correct, original, balanced, and more accessible version, while the Seventh Saga got a pretty bad reputation. Apparently, there's a little bit of a cult following for this game with the hacks that change it back to the Elnard stats, and that is ultimately what we played. This game hasn't had any ports or remakes. There was a sequel made, but it was only released in Japan, never came to America. They never completed the localization, and I'm sad about that. No awards, no no game of the year. Though GamePro did applaud the game's graphics, animation, music, sound effects, and non-linearity of the plot, which is interesting to read. They criticized the combat and puzzles. This got a 64% total aggregate score on game rankings. So that's where we are starting from. That's what they thought about it. But now we get to find out what we thought about it because we played this game in 2025 and 6. Okay, so we played which version? We played a patch or a ROM hack. I don't know what they call it, but yeah, it was a patch. We patched the 7th Saga ROM with the underlying math, I guess we could say, of Elnard, right?
Yeah. I tried the original version like very briefly, maybe an hour, hour and a half,
Mm-hmm.
and I was like, okay, I see how growth works. I see how leveling works. Let me play the patch version and actually play the version that I'm going to invest a lot of time into. And
Mm-hmm.
even that snippet was like, yep, I can definitely see how much more quickly my stats and stuff were growing.
Okay, you could. I was just gonna ask, like, was that enough to like get an idea? Because
Yeah,
this game kind of
100%.
starts. It kind of starts hard. Like there's a lot of
Mm-hmm.
challenge in the beginning because you're so weak. So it has an interesting difficulty curve where it's difficult at the beginning, gets a little bit easier, gets to like another kind of difficult stretch, and then gets easier for like the mid late game, and then gets really hard again for a short while before the very end of the game.
Yes, I definitely I did not beat the game, but I'm definitely in a period where I notice it's like skill checking me quite a bit. Where I'm like, okay, I need to like level grind significantly for these random encounters.
Yeah, it tends to do things like that. What's the last town you made it to?
Um, let's see, Tulane, I think is what it was called. It's right before the cave where you cross through to get to the dragon.
Okay. Yeah.
So like right around according I was using a walkthrough a little bit and right around midway through the walkthrough. So like midpoint of the game.
Mm. Okay. Yeah, so that's actually a really interesting part of the game because it kind of opens up a little bit. But let's go back. Let's start from the beginning here and I guess describe what the game is like. How is this different or is it from other JRPGs, Jake?
So I think the thing that I found fascinating about the start of this game is you have a really, I think, well done cutscene before the game even begins, where it introduces the various characters from the game. And when it starts, you have to pick one of these characters, and they each have different strengths, weaknesses, motivations for gathering all of the different. Runes in the game. I was like, what are they called?
Yeah.
The runes in the game.
And you would only know
And
those
I thought that
motivations from the book, I think, right? It doesn't really say that in the game.
I think it briefly introduces like through the cutscenes you kind of get the grasp of like the culture of the people.
Yes.
And there might be like very vague text, but yeah, the book is where you get the real info about it.
Yeah. Two of my favorites in that cutscene are Isuna, who is in the tavern at the bar, and King Lemel or Lamel, I don't know how to pronounce it, goes up to her. He starts walking away. She turns back to the bar for like a second, and only then like suddenly walks and follows him like, oh, I'm not going to do this. And then, maybe I will. And then the final one, Olven, the old dwarf who actually walks to the king's castle himself to kind of, he's not chosen, he wants to do it, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, I think the diversity between the character options is really fascinating, particularly when you take the time period of this game,
Hmm.
because you have like a robot person whose entire motivation that you mostly learn through the booklet at the beginning But as the game goes on, you do get snippets of this. Is that like his people keep losing the memory of like who they are and what like their life, and so he wants the runes to, I guess, discover the origins of his people and to like fix that. There's a demon who just wants to be a bad guy, that I just thought was like, it's like such a 90s thing, like, oh yeah, you can play a demon who just wants to get it and like become a tyrant. I'm like, why is the king picking him?
Yeah. I always loved the diversity in those characters.
Yeah, I think, and I'm the stats for them too is fascinating because like the sprite work is really good, but then each of the characters plays really different. And so in looking at walkthroughs for the game, there's certain characters that really give you a significantly harder start because you don't have a party with you initially. It's just you. And so if you're playing one of the caster characters, you can get wiped pretty fast. Whereas if you're playing like a melee character, you have a little bit more hit points, a little bit more defense. And so there's a really interesting choice of like, who do I want to start with and what do I want my early game to start with? But then later on, you get a partner. And so you want to pick a partner that like either doubles down on your strength or supports you in an interesting way. And so there's a really fascinating, like, okay, of these other characters, what one person do I want with me?
Hmm.
And I thought that was a really cool way to start the game.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very different in that you just have one character. Every other game you have a party of like 3, 4, whatever it is, but here you have just the one character and you only get one other party member. I do remember when I first played this game how I thought that I was going to get at least one more, and the first time I had a party member with me and I saw another apprentice out in the world and I spoke to them, I thought, oh, they'll join me too. And then my original friend was now just standing there saying, oh, good luck. I'm like, no, I wanted us all to go together. Why wouldn't we?
That's what
Wouldn't that
happened to
make it
me this
easier?
time.
Did it? That's
Yes, I
awesome.
accidentally traded someone, and I was like, well, I guess this is my new partner.
Yeah. So who did you choose?
So I picked Ulvin to start with, and my thought process was, again, looking at walkthroughs, looking at some guidance, and looking at how the characters develop. I wanted to pick someone who was pretty good in combat because I didn't want the early game to be miserable. So Ulvin gets like some spells, some healing magic, which was particularly important when I was like running around solo. And then I liked his motivation that he's old and he wants the runes to restore youth. I was like, you know what, good for you, guy. I'm getting these runes for you.
Nice. Yeah, and if you are a 7th Saga aficionado, you might learn that there are interesting little like unique elements for different characters and different pathing through the game for certain characters. So Ulven, he gets a few secrets throughout the game. He learns about a secret cave. He gets a special key that lets you go into a tower with really high level treasure for the time that you would encounter that tower. That's pretty cool. Later on in the game, he'll have the absolute strongest weapons. He's one of the stronger physical attackers, but not the strongest. But his weapons make up for it. Two of the other characters, the alien Wilm and the robot Lux, they're really strong physical and defensive characters, but they don't get weapons. They just have like raw innate ability. Lux also takes an unusual path from what the other characters do. Once you get to Bone, you don't go through the underground lake that connects to the next
Hmm.
area. You actually have to escort this child. I guess he only trusts two people, the giant robot and the girl. And those two characters, Lux and Asuna, have to actually go to a town all the way back in the beginning, the third town, and get on a boat, and that takes you to a different part of the continent. So you start somewhere else in the upper half of the continent as opposed to going to Dwayne. So that's kind of cool.
I almost picked the alien Wilma to play as because I really
Hmm.
liked their character design, and their backstory is kind of interesting because people treat them as like a villain or like an enemy because they look monstrous, but they really just are like seeking understanding. And I was like, that's a really
Oh, I didn't
interesting
even know that.
motivation.
That was the first character I ever beat the game with.
I mean, like playing that's the person who I played the US version for like an hour and a half.
Oh, nice.
And I was like, this person's pretty cool, but I could feel like my progress slowing, even though it claims that this person progresses faster than everyone else.
Mm,
Um, so, but I do really appreciate like there's a very clear like your experience is going to be different, and hearing there's even different like ways the characters progress through the story is really cool, especially for 1993.
yeah. And also, the characters have different percentages for how other characters will react to them. So
Mm.
if you are Isuna, for example, the lady elf, more of the characters will be more likely to want to befriend you more of the time, versus if you're like Wilm or Legis, for example, the demon or the alien. And certain characters hate each other, so it's really difficult. Their percent chance of joining one another is like in the single digits. That would be like Valsu, the human monk, and Legis, the demon who's chaotic evil. So that's pretty cool, I think. You can kind
Yeah.
of manipulate it by talking to the person, and if they don't immediately try to fight you, if you luck out and that doesn't happen, you could always, if they do that, you could always like reset and try again. You can go like grind a little bit and then go back and talk to them, and you'll get like a different RNG on their response to you. So there's a lot of like fiddling you can do to kind of get the game that you want to get out of 7th Saga, which is not really widely known and not explained at all in the manual.
Yeah, I was going to
But
say
it's
that
cool.
is not explained anywhere.
Yeah. Okay, so as for playing the game though, what do we do? We have towns. We're in towns. What do you think of the towns? Do you like the way they present each town?
So I think the towns are fairly standard JRPG sort of style, where almost every town has a inn, which is where you like go to stay to restore health and mana, and it I believe saves the game. I use save state, so I never really paid attention to that.
Mm-hmm.
You
Yeah,
get
you do
like an
save there.
armory where you buy armor, weaponsmith, item shop, and then usually there's a couple extra buildings and a church for healing and resurrecting.
Did it feel archaic? Like this is an older style of building a JRPG versus kind of what you experience later on with I guess with Final Fantasy games, and especially games when you get onto
Yeah,
like the PS1 era.
this felt a lot closer to what. So I've played Final Fantasy 1 on the GBA port, so it is a newer port, but it felt very similar to the town designs in that game, where there was a different color palette for towns, and the buildings might have been arranged differently, but the like overall shape, they were all like sort of boxy buildings, and they all like
Mm-hmm.
kind of look the same, just slightly different colors. So I think the design of the towns is archaic, is how I would put it. Like it feels very like
Yeah.
early JRPG design.
It's kind of like a Nintendo era style
Yes.
with Super Nintendo era kind of upresing and graphical
Hmm.
enhancements. Yeah.
Even the like NPCs you're meeting have a very like Nintendo era vibe, where like all of the townsfolk look basically the same, and all of the
Mm-hmm.
like people who are like working the shops look very similar, which
Mm-hmm.
can make finding information a little challenging because it's harder to figure out like, once you reach a couple years in the future, Final Fantasy VI, Chrono Trigger, like generally the folks you need to talk to have like identifying features like a cool design or different things to make you want to talk to them. Whereas this is sort of like, yes, the person in the top right hand corner, they look like everyone else, but they've got the information you need and the ring you need to open the next part of the game.
Yeah. Well, yeah, a lot of them do look similar. There are a couple of unique sprites for like characters that are important. Like the guy, what's his name, Brantu. He takes you to open up the cave. I think he's a unique
Mm-hmm.
sprite. Then early on, there's the I guess he's the mayor of one of the towns or something. He's like bigger and has a cape, but then you find that that sprite is repeated later on with other
Right.
like mayors of the town or the sage in another town. So there are a few that are unique, but you're absolutely right. They really do duplicate the sprites for a lot of those NPCs, and what they say is pretty limited. Their
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
responses when you talk to them is like one line, two lines. Every once in a while, you'll get someone who tells you something more. But what they tried to do, it seems, was like give you a little bit of information from what this person says, a hint of information from what this other person says, and you kind of have to piece it together by talking to literally everyone in every town.
It made me think of early Pokemon games where like the NPCs you talk to literally almost have a single sentence, but all
Hmm.
of them in the area have sentences that are all usually united by one detail they're trying to get across.
Yeah, this is this is really revealing. Um, Remember when I played Pokemon Red and Blue? How I was like, "Oh, I love this game. It's so good," because it's that very classic JRPG style. Though
Mm-hmm.
it also had its own unique stuff. Okay, what about like unique stuff? There isn't like a ton. I mean, we already talked about the characters, which was, but what about the way that you encounter enemies? I always love that, and I wonder if that strikes a new player as something special and interesting, and why didn't they do this in a lot of other games?
Yeah, I think it's really cool. You have this like a compass meets a radar, like a mini map when you're on the above world, and there's
Hmm.
little dots on it that represent enemies that are moving around, and when they connect with the dot representing you, then you hit a fight. But there's also yellow squares to represent treasure chest, and then hollowed out squares, I guess is how I would describe it, to represent locations you can explore or like towns.
Hmm.
And I thought that was really cool because you like if you want to avoid fights, you can kind of try your best to avoid them if you're low on health. It's still a little hard
Yeah.
to, especially in like dungeon areas where you don't have a ton of movement. But in the above world where you basically have free range and then you're not kind of limited in space, you can really avoid fights when you want to, or vice versa. Like I was doing when grinding, you can really like just chase those dots, and I think it's a pretty cool way to handle. They feel like random encounters, but you have a little bit more control over them, which for this era is a really cool way to handle that.
Yeah. Credit where credit is due. 7th Saga doing something cool. Just mark that one down in the this is a good game column.
There's one other thing that like I really noticed that this game did in gameplay that I really appreciate it, which is most JRPGs have some sort of defend function or a wait function, but usually they
Hmm.
don't have like a ton of purpose, or if they do, it just slightly raise user defense. But a big part of the strategy in fights is you actually want to defend for your first attack, because then when you attack next, it greatly increases your damage while also reducing what you will take back that turn. And so you sort of get in this flow of defend, attack, defend, attack. Oh, they have a little bit of health left. I'm just going to risk it and hit. Oh, that was a mistake I missed. Now I'm screwed. And I thought that was kind of like I like the way that created a unique flow to the turn-based fighting.
Yeah, I agree. It almost turns into like a little bit of a logic puzzle. Like, okay, if I
Mm-hmm.
defend this time, because you have to pay attention to the cadence of the enemy's attacks, because they won't attack every time as you switch from character to character for your turns. So you'll say, oh, if they attacked my partner, then it's likely they're not going to attack again to attack my main character. And if that character is kind of not a tanky character, you want to be really careful about when you apply your offensive maneuver because that leaves you vulnerable. So you might defend a couple times in a row to protect your like squishier characters because even though we were playing the Elnard version, there's still quite a bit of challenge and you could die
Mm-hmm.
in any given random encounter. So I do like I like the flow of the battles kind of a lot, and I don't really see that talked about much by people who criticize the game.
I think it's an interesting touch. I will say, I don't want to oversell it. I don't. I don't think it always works in the way that I personally wanted it to. It wasn't. It sometimes creates these pacings where it's like, okay, there's three enemies. I will defend with my attacker and then use my. I had a support character, the priest. I can't remember his name.
Valsu.
Asuna? Valsu, thank you. Asuna was the sorceress who I originally had and accidentally swapped out for Valsu. Um, but I had Valsu, who has a really nice spell called Power, which increases the strength of your character, and so I would use him basically to buff Ulvin, defend with Ulvin, and then hit something. And basically, when Power and Defend was on, I could almost one hit almost any random encounter that was like felt like about on level for me. But if I missed, I was like, "Oh man, this is bad. I just wasted like 3 turns and would just get like wrecked sometimes." And I couldn't like I don't mind misses and I don't mind some of that like challenge of like your plan isn't perfectly working, but it sort of felt like a lot of the strategies revolve around these like multi-step things, but then the miss rate is significantly higher in this than I felt like it was in many games I played, if that makes sense. So it like the
Yeah.
tempo's interesting, but it did have many frustrating moments where I was like, "Oh my god."
Yeah, you can miss a lot. There's a lot of dodging in this game, which, I mean, I like that it's dodging as opposed to in other games where it just says miss. I'm like, what do you mean I
Mhm.
missed? I at least like that it's dodging, but it's all stat based. Like, if you're not a fast enough character for an enemy that's fast, you're going to miss a lot. So, it helps to have agility spells, which only Valsu gets the agility spell, I think, or the bottled agility to raise essentially your chance to hit, which I mean it's kind of a lot to ask. You're right about that.
It is one of those things where because the maths aren't like very clear in the game, you sort of are constantly doing this equation of, okay, well, if I defend and then power, I should be able to kill the enemy, but there's a chance I miss. But is it better to cast agility so that I hit twice and kill? Or do I, like, you get in this weird, like, I just want to kill him in one hit, and then you miss, and you're like, oh my god. But I do think, I mean, that speaks to there is depth to this combat that I think is very easy to miss if you're not looking into the, like, how do these stats all work together? Because it's not
Yeah.
clear at all that agility affects to hit the speed of your attack, except if you're really, really looking into, like, the booklet and looking at, like, some
Hmm.
walkthroughs of how different things impact things.
Or even one step further, guides on the internet from people who have like
Mm
looked
hmm.
into the code and figured it out. Also, agility affects how much you dodge. So, in this game, it seems like this is an imbalance, right? Because if you just have a character with really high speed stat, I know it's funny that they use the spell agility to affect your speed stat. There's no agility stat, but your speed stat will dictate how often you dodge your enemies. So if I'm playing as, like I said, a squishy character like Isuna, but my speed stat is very high because I made sure to reset the game after I got a level up that wasn't favorable and try again, or use a save state in our case, um, you could jack up that speed stat and just dodge a lot of the time. And, not getting hit at all is way better than even having to worry about your defense stat or using the defend command or having armor. So
Yeah.
that's kind of an imbalance. And that to me makes, a character like Isuna so powerful when maybe some other characters are not really as viable. So that's a criticism too.
I think it's also worth noting, like, this isn't new to this game, but like during combat you have your like general attack, which is a melee attack. You have
Hmm.
spells. Each character has a specific pool of spells they'll unlock as they level up, or in some cases get no spells. The
Right.
two casting heavy characters, Valsu and Asuna, obviously get the most spells, but then like Olvin gets a couple of attack spells, a couple of heal spells.
Hmm.
The demon person, I believe, gets some spells.
No, he gets a ton actually.
He gets a ton. That makes sense.
Yeah, he's a big offensive magic user, and like Valsu will have only white magic and support magic, buffing spells, and then Isuna will not have any fire magic. She'll only have offensive like ice spells or things like that, but
Hmm.
she'll get buffing stuff and healing stuff, but just not quite as much as the essentially the white mage.
And then Lux, because he's a robot, starts with like a unique attack, right? That's kind of functions as a spell because I don't think Lux can learn magic, right? It just gets a like laser beam attack.
That it's considered magic. His
Okay.
his spells are laser 1, 2, and 3, and thunder 1 and 2 for multi enemy attacks. That's I guess that's another thing to mention is like some characters do get magical attacks that hit all three of your opponents. Some don't get that, and those are really useful, especially early in the game for grinding and getting through battles more quickly. There are some resistances to different of these elements. You know, there's ice, there's fire, and there's I guess we'll just call it like robot magic because it all counts together. And some characters, some enemies are immune even to certain types. I think there's very later in the game there's a an ice dragon that is only affected by fire magic. So if you don't
Wow.
have fire magic, you have to get all B fires and physical attacks, but
Sure, sure.
like ice magic would do like single digit or I don't remember exactly,
Mm.
but it's just very very weak. You like what you want to do is cast fire magic at him.
And I think it's worth noting, like, if you're listening and you're like, oh, maybe I'll give this game a try, the game does not make it clear which characters are going to get what spells. So this is
Right.
where I think a walkthrough can come in really handy. Because I think, like, having played a good chunk of this game, I think the partner you pick for your character is super, super important. And like in
Yes.
hindsight, I picked Valsu almost accidentally. I had Asuna first, talked to Valsu, and he was like, "Do you want me to join you?" And I felt bad saying no. And I was like, "Oh well, maybe like I can swap them." And then like we swapped, and suddenly I didn't have my offensive mage anymore. And I was like,
Yeah. But both of them are good partners for Olvan, luckily.
yes. Just a very different pacing, right? Because I wanted the offensive magic to just blast through certain fights, whereas
Yeah.
Valsu's much better at pumping up and keeping Ulvin alive so that you can really grind through fights. So it just depends on the pacing.
Right.
And there's not really a way to change that because you can't. This isn't like Final Fantasy VI. You have your different. I can't remember what the creatures are called, but you equip them and you get different spells, so you can kind of like alternate what abilities and stat growths your characters have. You don't really have that type of manipulation and abilities in this
Yeah.
game. Like new items don't unlock new attacks.
Yeah, it definitely lacks that sort of depth in that customization. Um, Valsu, just as an aside, is basically invincible at the end of the game because he gets this spell called Elixir that heals the target's health and magic to full, just all at once,
Mm,
including the MP that you just spent on the spell. It's
right, so you just do
crazy.
it forever.
Yeah. I mean, you could stay alive forever. It's just a matter of can you kill your enemy with Ice 1. How did you feel about the animations of the spells? Because as a kid, I loved them, and I now still love them, but I don't know if that is a reasonable love. I thought they were good.
Yeah, I mean, I think the visuals of this game as a whole is probably one of the strongest things it brings to the table. Like,
Mm,
the animations of the spells are really good. You already mentioned it, but if a character misses an attack, the enemy or the character actually like jumps backwards, so it's a
hmm.
true dodge rather than just like the word miss popping up. The sprite work on the enemies themselves is astounding. Like the enemies are really creepy and weird looking in really cool
Mm-hmm.
ways. I didn't get to see a ton of different spell uses because most of Valsu's spells like don't really do like ice. I have ice one and I
Mm-hmm.
have like heals, but the
Yeah.
heals is generally like looking the same. Power up generally looks the same, and then I was doing a lot of attacking with Olvin and occasional fire spells.
Oh,
But
true.
I think that what I saw looked really cool, and was comparable to anything I've seen on the Super Nintendo.
Yeah, comparable to anything he's seen. You hear that, listener?
Specifically in the enemies and the fights. As we said, the towns themselves a little lackluster, but
Yeah.
the artwork for the enemies is awesome. And I think on grinding with the boys, we played a couple of JRPGs, but one of the ones we played more recently was Grandia, and I talked about how I didn't really like the sprite work on the enemies. Like, they're just kind of lackluster designs. I never really knew what I was fighting. They didn't have a vibe to them. And this game just crushes it on that, where it's like it's
Hmm.
very clear what the feeling and the type of enemy that's being evoked, and like different areas have different kind of styles of enemies, so you kind of be like, oh, I'm in the area that has a lot of these weird kind of creepy bug monsters, or like these priests and these demon guys, and like I really appreciated that.
Nice. Yeah. So I guess building on that, when you were in some of those unique areas like the dungeons or caves or castles or whatever that were set up for you to like navigate through, like they were, you would consider these like the levels of the game, right? How did you feel
Hmm.
about those dungeon designs? Were they samey? Did they feel diverse? What was your vibe from playing through a few of those?
They all felt the same,
Yeah.
unfortunately. Most of them are sort of like corridors with not much in them. A couple of ones are like castle corridors, but they felt like, if you're thinking Final Fantasy 1 on the GBA, like they look nicer, but the design is very like NES era design, I
Mm-hmm.
think.
Simple. Yeah.
And they're very maze like, where like you're going to be making wrong turns and then dead ends and different things like that, and you're going to have to backtrack and do a bunch of fights on the way. And that's just sort of how the game works.
Right. And that is the complexity of those areas. Like that is the
Hmm.
game, is finding your way through. Every once in a while they have one that's more linear, every once in a while they have one that's more branching, and that becomes whether interesting or frustrating. Take your pick.
And generally, there's not much like interacting. Like, at least the sort of dungeons and things I went into, like there aren't really like NPCs or story elements that you're interacting with in those, beyond piecing together like the flavor that the enemies are bringing.
Yeah. Basically it's just whatever happens at the end when you reach that
Yes.
final boss, there's like a little conversation and it kind of continues on the story of what you learned at the nearby town that told you that this is the place that you had to go because this is what's happening in this area. And what do you feel about that? Like how when you get to each town there's like its own little scenario, its own little goings on, and you're kind of roped in to do whatever is necessary to kind of help these people and get whatever kind of reward may be. Typically, if you're lucky, a rune, which is the ultimate goal of the game.
I think it's passable. I wouldn't say
Yeah.
this is good storytelling, and I don't think most people, especially playing it in 2026, are going to like be like, yeah, the story, I want to figure out what's happening, because it's very bare bones storytelling.
Hmm.
In the
Like you
same way
could
that
care
like,
about it or you could ignore it.
yes, exactly. Like you're not growing attached to the people you're helping in towns, because they have no personality beyond their single sentence
Right.
telling you like, "Hey, the town up north and I might go to war for ore." And you're like, "Okay." And they're like, "Maybe we should stop this." And then you walk there and the town up north is like, "Yeah, we need more money." It's like, that's the extent of the
Yeah.
interaction.
Interesting thing about that one in particular, since you bring it up, is if you
Yeah,
don't
yeah, yeah.
stop the war, prices for weapons remain high. And if you do,
Huh.
the prices drop. I think it's maybe just in those two towns. I don't know if it extends out to other parts of the continent, but it might. It might. But I
That's pretty
always I
cool.
always go find the ore on the island and give it to the king, and that he like says, "Oh my God, you saved us. Well, now we don't have to go to war." Great, great, buddy.
I mean, that's a great touch, but I think like if you're jumping into this without a ton of context, like in general, the dialogue, it feels almost Zelda, like early Zelda like to me, where
Mm-hmm.
the dialogue is telling you the next point to go, not necessarily giving you a motivation, though.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And the funny thing is, even in that very specific scenario, that particular example, if you do stop the war, you don't know that the prices are changed really, unless you were paying
Right,
really
right.
close attention. And if you don't stop the war, you don't know that the prices could have been changed.
hmm
It's just
hmm
not it's not part of the experience. You kind of have
There
to
are
figure
some
that out.
cool story beats, and I think I only hit this once in the game. But like your core goal is to collect all the different runes. And there's the other characters that are, you could pick from are also doing this if you don't have them join
Yes.
your team. And you end up fighting them, and I think that's one of the more compelling bits of storytelling, and it's not like dialogue based storytelling. It's almost like what you refer to as like archaeological storytelling, right? Like
Yeah.
you're digging into what's happening. So it really makes sense to me that like this is the type of like even for an early game, you really enjoy this type of storytelling.
Yeah, it's just piecing things together, learning from the environment, learning from like little snippets here and there. Not a lot of exposition and
Mhm.
conversation and telling you. A lot of times if I'm playing like a Final Fantasy game, for example, I am just exhausted by the conversations between the characters cuz a lot of times it's just hard to care, and I wish they would say what they needed to say faster without trying to like get me to think that I'm their friend or something. Um,
Sure.
if it's done really well, then that's a different case. Like in Final Fantasy X, for example, I loved those characters talking to each other because I felt like I enjoyed that party because we were on again a beginning to end sort of trek, and they were companions throughout the journey. But in some other ones, it's just like, God, you're so verbose, and this one is like just way in the other direction. Like, God, you're not telling
Yes.
me anything.
I'd love to hear your thoughts on the music for this game. Some of the reviews I read coming in had like mixed things to say about the music, and I have some feelings, but I'm super curious. I feel like I already know where you stand, but I'm super curious where you stand as a fan of the game on the music.
I've always loved the music. I find so many of the songs to be super earwormy, and I feel like they're exemplary of the SNES sound font. They're like so SNES sounding, but I feel like none of the music in this game is necessarily orchestra worthy. Like it's not
Mm-hmm.
Lord of the Rings, for example, but it's all like really pleasant and catchy, and a lot of them have like this kind of pastoral feeling to it, and you're going to these towns that are highly isolated in this large world, and it's not a very technologically advanced world at all. It's definitely a like a high fantasy sort of setting with not, I guess, not a lot of technology or culture really. It's like,
Minus the robot people.
yeah, well, I mean, yeah, they throw that in there, but otherwise it it is
Yeah, there's
definitely
not.
a very sort of rural kind of world in a
Yeah.
way, and the music kind of vibes with that, and I find myself like whistling all the tunes all the time. What do you think of the music?
I like the music. I think it is one of those games like you listen every fight, you hear the same soundtrack. I think there's only really like two fight soundtracks. There's like the boss fight music and then the like regular fight
There are
music.
more later, but yeah, they definitely do have like the standard fight sounds.
And like those are both fine, but after, several hours of hearing them, I definitely switched to like muting the music and
Oh,
listening to podcasts and audiobooks while I was playing, particularly when I was like, I need to level up three levels, and that's going to take me like 45 minutes of just fighting random fights in the wilderness. So I just will listen to 45 minutes of my audiobook instead.
okay.
I also played this game on fast forward quite a bit, which means the music is like
Oh
unlistenable,
no.
uh,
Yeah.
unfortunately. But I did play enough to hear it and think that, yeah, I think what is there is good, and it's something that I would like happily listen to in a YouTube like playlist, um,
Hmm.
on repeat with the few tracks there are. I definitely hit points where I'm like, okay, I'm done with the OST because there's not that many tracks. But what is there, I think, is good. I just wish there was more, but
Okay.
also it's a early SNES game, so I get it.
Fair. Fair. That is a very sober take on it as opposed to me being like, I love it. Even though it's not like particularly notable as far as game soundtracks go. I love it. What else do I love? Oh, maybe I don't love this. Maybe I do. We'll see. How do you feel about the bosses? You got to encounter Romus Pyson, the other apprentice, and I guess that's it. You didn't really get to see a whole lot of bosses, did you?
Yeah, I didn't get to see a ton of bosses. I liked the boss fights that were the monsters. The apprentice fight I hit was super frustrating, and I remember
Mm,
messaging you because I kept wiping, and up to that point the game wasn't particularly hard, and so I was like, what is going on? And at first I was like, oh, I guess I need to grind a little bit, like I need to level up. And then I like between I think either you or the walkthrough like told me the apprentices actually level up with to meet your level. So like
yeah.
there's no way to like level up enough to beat it, and I just had to essentially like use a different strategy. But because you're kind of limited in your options, I really just used a save state and kept reloading and hoping the RNG meant that like my enemy missed when I needed it to.
Uh,
And eventually that worked. I upped my I used an agility potion to up my speed so I would dodge more. And hit them more after you told me that's how that like worked. And I was like, oh, okay, that's obviously the move rather than powering up. Um, but the apprentice fights, I like narratively and conceptually really really cool. It's
yeah.
actually like it was actually a pretty like exciting fight to go into. The town actually did a pretty good job building up this person being like, yeah, they're kind of a jerk, they came into the castle and they just took it over, and then you
Yep.
show up and like he's like it was Camille for me, and he was like, like join me and we'll rule here and blah 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 blah, like classic villain speech. But like that's the first time this game I think had really like delivered on something that way.
Hmm.
But then the fight was so annoying because
Yeah.
it just he was like three hitting me and I'm like, what is this?
Yeah, the apprentice fights are like notably pretty bad as far as that frustration and poor balance and being a point at which people just can't continue. Unfortunately, I do like the story element of it, of like competing against each other and some of them hating you and some of them liking you. And actually, at Patroff, that castle, if he said join me, you could just join him and walk away and you get the rune that he has, but he's your partner. And now you just skip that fight. But you don't stay there and
Huh.
rule. You just take him away from the cat. He's like, join me, we can rule. And you're like, okay. And then you're like, now follow me. And you just leave. And he just goes, okay, okay, I guess we'll leave this town.
Interesting.
Yeah.
The other bosses though, I felt like the sprite work on them was really cool. So that like continued throughout. None of the other boss fights actual combat really stood out to me from what I remember other than the apprentice, but like I remember the bosses like looking very cool, and I looked up what some of the other bosses looked like and I was like, "Oh yeah, these are
Yeah.
awesome."
Yeah, those they always look really cool. Those early ones are kind of basic. It's just like back and
Yeah.
forth, attacking and magic. Later on, there are some cooler ones. There's a town that I love called, I think, Bilthem, where it's been taken over by a cultish ruler, and everybody in the town is basically brainwashed, much like America. And no one can beat him because he separates into like three, and you have to find a special item in a jail. There's an old man in a jail cell who gives you, I think it's called the star or something like that, and you have to use that, and it makes it so that this boss character is vulnerable, and that's the only way you can beat him. And when you do, everyone's like, "Oh my god, I feel like I was in a dream. The curse of Doros is gone." And I thought that was a cool town. And
Hmm.
then there's one where this serpent woman has captured all the children of a nearby town, and you go and fight her. There's nothing really special about the fight, but interestingly, afterward, all the kids are just in a room back there, and they're like, "Oh, we're having so much fun. We're all playing together." And I'm like, "That's weird," because like she's objectively doing a villainous thing, but like she's not a bad person. She was just like, I think she must have in the story like lost her child and then she wanted children.
Mm.
It's like, it's a like a psychologically damaged character, but she's just a monster. Like her whole lower body is like a weird lobster spider like character, a lot like Quelaag in Dark Souls. Just like that kind of a character later
Or
on.
like a Drider in D&D.
Yeah. I guess those are like the more interesting ones. Later on, the final boss is pretty interesting. You have to get an item to make it so that you can see him even.
Hmm.
Then you have to use all the 7 runes in a specific order to, cut down half its health, to cut its magic power, to make it vulnerable, to decrease its defense, blah blah blah. And you'd use all of them in order. And I don't know how you figure that order out. I guess trial and error. Maybe it doesn't have to be in order. Maybe there's like an optimal order, but you can do it in any order. But like it's smarter to do it in a certain way so you don't die. But in any case, you have to use all the runes to defeat the final boss, and then that's the end of that. You do end up. Are you going to finish this game? Can I spoil a little bit of
Go
stuff?
ahead and spoil it. Yeah, go ahead and spoil it.
You do end up defeating a like fake version of the final boss in the present time, and then you are sent back in time, and you have to go through a differently arranged version of the Western continent, which is what you thought was the final continent on your original journey, but you start at a different point and continue from there. You do end up going and seeing the lost city of Melanam, where all the robots came from, and you find out what happened there and how this they created a special technologically advanced weapon to go fight the main boss of the game, but it malfunctions and destroys the continent, thereby killing all of the robots and all of the technology in the world.
Wow.
And ultimately, at the end of the game, your character is um, somehow sent forward through time to be reborn as King Lemel, the person who sends you on the journey to begin with.
Huh.
Huh. It's kind of cool. It's interesting. I mean, it's somewhat generic, I would say, right? Like, and oh, look, you know, I don't know, but I liked it when I was a kid. I still think it's fine.
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting conclusion.
You don't really get any story until the end of the story, right?
Yeah, I mean, very, like, it fits the way the game played, right? Like, you don't get story usually till you beat the dungeon, so most of the
Right,
big story comes when you're getting close to beating the game.
right. Yeah, so that's that.
I think the difficulty's worth talking about, because I
Oh
feel like
yeah,
that popped up a lot during, like, reviews, walkthroughs, and we both already said, like, if you're going to play this, play the Japanese version, because the US
yeah,
version, and like, it's not just that it's hard, it's that they literally like made it unfair with the stat growth. So you
right.
like the Japanese version is still very grind heavy. The US version, I mean, you said you beat the US version, which is astounding to me.
Numerous times. I didn't have much to do when I was a child, I guess.
Fair.
Yeah. Yeah,
But
it's
I felt like,
objectively worse for
yes,
sure.
right. And I felt like, so I was trying to compare this experience to like early Pokemon games. a thing that happens a lot in the Pokemon community is folks say like the newer games are significantly easier because you level up faster, you have items to share XP, the moves are better, a couple other things. I mean, that's 100% true. So early Pokemon games are both either considered better because they're grind heavy or worse because they're grind heavy, depending what type of gamer you
Mm.
are. And so I was like trying to compare the level of grind, and this is significantly more grinding than a Pokemon game.
Oh
I
yeah.
think if you're playing this, you need to play it on an emulator now, because if I didn't have fast forward, like I would have gotten through a fraction of what I did.
Mm.
But with like fast forward, it's like, oh, I'm going to level up 2 levels. These random enemies are kind of being a challenge, so let me level up 2, 3 levels. Just sit here for 45 minutes, vibe after work, like that'll be fine. But if I'm at times 4 speed, 45 minutes is actually pretty close to 3-4 hours of grinding, right? And so I can't imagine playing it without that fast forward.
Yeah. Or the save states, because you can be on a pretty
Yeah. Oh.
long overland trek between towns, not, and you don't know where you're going really. You just have to like guess.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I'll just follow this direction until I see a little circle on my map and go to that town. Um, you can be pretty far away, having spent a lot of time fighting kind of tough enemies and using some of your resources, your items, whatever, and then just die. And then just go back to the most recent town you were at, half of your money gone. No big deal. Your companion completely dead. You have to go revive him at the church or her. Um,
Oh
yeah,
yeah,
pretty
like without
punishing.
save states, I can't even picture how I'd play this without save states, because like the game over is like on the surface pretty forgiving, right? Like you don't get a true game over screen. You just have a black screen and wake up at the inn, half your money's gone. And money's pretty plentiful, especially if you are leveling up. Like I never felt like I couldn't buy the equipment in the next town. Especially because if I couldn't buy it, I was like, cool, that's a sign I have to level up, right?
Yeah, but
Um
actually later you're also,
oh, does it
if you're
become an
using
issue?
like Olvin, for example, or God forbid you're using Olvin and Camille, you are grinding just to have enough gold to buy the weapons at that level. Well, at least in the US version. Um,
Okay.
yeah,
But
which is
like your
annoying.
save points, so let's say you, I don't know, wipe out, you lose a ton of money, you're like, I can't handle that, and you're like, I'm going to reload. Well, your reload is last time you rested in the inn, so you're not any better off, except you might have more money. Like it
Yeah,
doesn't, you can't just like load to the save point right before the boss fight or something like that. You have to re-go through that whole path
yep.
if you're not using save states. And I would crash out so hard during some of the things where I had like where I had game overs, because because of the tempo of the fights, with the way power up, defend, and then suddenly miss, and then your group wipe suddenly can happen. I'd be in the middle of a dungeon, significantly far, low on resources, but I was like, I can feel it. I'm near the end. And then I would just have like a series of poor misses and just wipe out in 3 turns. And I'd be like, well, I'm glad I have a save state. I'm just going to reload. Not a big deal.
Yeah,
But if I had to like redo that whole thing, I'd be like, I'm
that
not
would
going
be
back in
so
there.
rough. Yeah, not a single save state anywhere but in the towns. So any of those long dungeons, especially with like a tough boss at the end, where
Uh huh.
you've wasted your resources just getting there, and now you have to fight the boss, and you're like on your last threads of items. Like, okay, I hope I can stretch this to win this fight. Usually you
And you have a
can't.
limit of how many of a certain item you can carry. I think it's 9.
Yeah,
And so early on when I'm playing Olvin, I have like some minor healing magic, but I was really like overloading on healing potions going to dungeons and magic restore, because I knew I'd need it, because I didn't want to get to the end of the dungeon and realize, oh, I can't actually beat the boss. Um, and you can find some of this stuff through drops with enemies, but it's not plentiful. It's not like you're refilling up guaranteed through the course of the dungeon. In general, you will be draining your resources, and then once you get your second partner, if you pick the right support, it can help alleviate that quite a lot. But there's plenty of times, even like towards the middle of the game, where I'd be like, I am low on magic with my characters. I have no more items that are going to help me here. I need to just leave this area and return to town, and then redo that whole
yeah.
section, and just take that as like that was me grinding for this period.
Yep. The saving grace here, if we can call it that, is the runes, which are infinite use.
Yes,
You don't have access to all of them in the beginning. You get them slowly throughout the game, but they do a lot of the similar things as some of the items that are pretty important for combat and for like these treks through the dungeons. So the first one, the wind rune, is actually a teleport to any town you've been to, and easily the most
fantastic.
useful in the game. Um, you have the water rune, which heals your hit points, like a potion 2 would, I guess. You've
But it
got
never
one.
runs out, which is really nice.
Yeah,
But you
you
can
can use
only
it
use it in
over and
combat,
over and
which is less
over.
nice.
Yeah, but I think that's a fair compromise, right? It's
Yeah,
like
it is
just an
fair.
infinite heal. You would just heal 5 times while standing still, and now it's a max heal. The fact that it's only in the battles makes sense. Then you have one that increases your power, one that heals your magic, one that increases your magic power, one that increases your defense, maybe one that increases your agility too. Yeah, I think the Sky Rune increases your agility. So like they're all like the B power, B protect, B agility, those things, the magic herb and the potion too. So like your main important things that you're going to be wanting to use all the time, at least you have those things in the runes and they're infinite use until you go back in time, then they're all gone.
I really liked the rune system. I thought it was cool that the game teaches you the importance of these limited use items that you have to carry around,
Yeah.
and then slowly you basically through meticulous discovery you gain limitless use item that replaces that. Like I think that's really clever and like worked well. It meant the rewards when I finally got another rune felt like legitimately very exciting.
Yeah. All right. So I think we covered the majority of this game. So at the end of every episode, we like to decide whether a game was worth revisiting in now 2026 and beyond, and if we would recommend it to someone, or if it wasn't. If it was, we call it a smash, and if it wasn't, well, that makes it more of a brick. So, Jake, having played this game that I loved so much as a child in 2026 and 2025, what are your thoughts? And is it a smash or a brick?
I think this is a game that you need a couple of like asterisks next to how you're classifying it. I think if you're playing the Japanese version and you're playing with emulation that gives you save states and fast forward, this is definitely a smash for folks who like older JRPGs. I think there's enough interesting things this game is trying. I think it is a very bold attempt at doing some things differently than other JRPGs before it. It doesn't always land, but I think it does enough well that I enjoyed my time with it. And I really appreciate it seeing this sort of in between the golden era of NES JRPGs and the golden era of SNES JRPGs. It very much is in conversation with those two eras. It's not perfect. You definitely need to play the Japanese version. You definitely need to use an emulator. Otherwise, it's going to probably drive you crazy, especially if you don't have experience with it. And then you
Mm.
probably want to look up a walkthrough because it doesn't explain things about the characters, and that character choice is really, really important. But I really appreciated a lot of what this game did. The enemy design alone is worth spending a couple of hours in it because the enemies are so cool and look so interesting. So yes, a smash. I would say it's like a B minus
Oh.
C plus smash for me. Like, is this a game that I'm going to be recommending to everyone? No, but it is a game I'm really happy I played and that I would recommend to people being like, what's a JRPG that you think people who are interested in the history of JRPG should play?
Amazing. That is amazing. Awesome. I'm so glad because you could have come on here and been like, what the heck did you make me play? And I agree with a lot of this. I think there is a lot of stuff in this game that is interesting, that's worth experiencing from kind of a gaming history standpoint, as you said. I love it, obviously. There's a lot of stuff that is still likable about it, but with all those caveats, like you just listed like 7 caveats, right?
I did.
And I'm going to think in terms of, do I want to give a broad recommendation to the general gaming public? Sure. If you are a Dragon Quest 1 through 4 lover, then yeah, play this game. But honestly, despite the fact that it's one of my favorite games of my life, I don't think it's really recommendable at this point without saying, you
Oof.
know what, just give it a shot. And I will say this, if you want to, go take a look, give it a shot, see what it's all about. But I'm not saying that this is a game that needs to be played, especially when it's the Super Nintendo and there are tons of games, again, that I haven't gotten around to yet, but that we know from the mass critical opinion are really absolutely worth going back and spending 50, 60 hours on. This one, I'm going to have to say, is not a smash in the way that I would like to recommend smashes on this show. And that means that it has to be a brick. And I'm sorry to myself. I'm sorry to the 7th Saga, to Produce, to Enix, to everyone involved. You have my love. You've always had my love. But today, I have to do what's right for everyone listening and say that it is not a smash like I would like to recommend.
Whew,
Aw.
I did not expect that.
Yeah, I mean, I still love it. You know, for me, it's a smash personally. But I just have to like think, am I gonna say play this or play Earthbound? I'm gonna say play
Fair,
Earthbound,
fair.
you know?
Yeah, I mean, if you told me, do you want to play this or Chrono Trigger? Like, that's an easy choice. I'm playing Chrono
Yeah.
Trigger.
And probably 10 to 15 to 20 other RPGs of the era for a lot of people. But I still think you should go check it out just for fun. Anybody who's playing it, just get on an emulator, check it out. But
hmm
no, it's not gonna live on the Smashing Bricks playlist as a double smash.
I do think there's some irony that I think this game is better now with emulation and the tools that gives and the ability to play the Japanese
True,
port than it was back in the day, which is kind
true.
of interesting, right? Like, in some ways, this has aged really well because it's gotten better with the extra tools we have.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I guess that's another way to look at it. Like, we have access to this stuff. We don't have to judge it based on what it is without the emulation tools. But someone could be buying the cartridge to put into their Super
Right, right.
Nintendo they still have, right? And a lot of people
Yeah,
do.
don't
That's
do
a
that.
big way to enjoy retro games. So yeah, I'm gonna stick with that. I actually came in thinking, of course I'm gonna give it a smash. It's this game that I love. But as we talked about it, I was like, I just don't feel right saying it's a smash. But that's okay, because everyone knows that I love it. Anyway, so that makes the 7th Saga a question block in 2026. So listen to our words, hear what we've had to say, and make your decision for yourself. I don't have listener commentary readily available, but you can go to the Discord. Go check out the Discord where we can have chats about all kinds of video games all the time. And you could find that at links.smashingbricks.com. Otherwise, I will move on to my regularly scheduled outro patter. Thanks everybody for listening. If you haven't yet, please go to Apple Podcasts or Spotify or your favorite podcasting platform and leave us a glowing rating and review if you like the show and if they have them. I'll always be on the lookout for the written reviews, and if you leave one, there's a chance I will read it on the show. You can also go above and beyond and support the show monetarily while getting some fun perks at patreon.smashingbricks.com. You can become a patron for as little as $1 a month. You also have options to get a shout out on the show, to get patron designation in Discord. You can get brand new bonus round episodes every month at the Fireflower tier, and you can suggest games for us to play on future Power Up episodes, which I will pick from and it's a much, much smaller pool. Tanuki tier patrons also get my handwritten notes for every episode and ongoing recognition on the show, like Ms. Muso is getting right now. And Ms. Muso is also a Starman patron who gets a guest spot on an episode of the show, as you heard last month. As for next episode, it is currently to be determined, to be revealed, and to be announced. You can find that in the Discord and on Instagram and Facebook coming up soon. So whenever that is revealed, get your hands on a copy, play along, send in your thoughts, and join us next time on Smashing Bricks. That wraps it up for today. I'm still Eddie Inzauto. That is Jake, Bugcatcher Jake, to be specific. Thanks, Jake. And until next time, may the nostalgia be with you. Let me just quickly check this third loaf of bread.
Sure.
Just squeezing in all the things I gotta do all together.
Loves just squeezing in a little bit of baking in the background.